Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're not just looking at one of the world's most incredible natural wonders. Nope, we're going to uncover the secret history hidden in the mist right in front of where you're standing.
So as you stand here, feeling the spray on your face, hearing that roar, you can't help but be awestruck by the sheer power of it all. But it also makes you wonder, doesn't it?
For almost 200 years, this exact spot has been a stage, a proving ground for some of history's most audacious, most creative, and sometimes most tragically foolish characters. The whole history of people trying to take on the falls, well, it pretty much happened in two big waves. First, you had the age of dancing on a wire, high above the abyss, and then came a dramatic shift to plunging right into its fury. Okay, so let's start with that first era. Our story begins not down there in that churning water, but way, way up, on a thin rope stretched across the very gorge you're looking at right now. Back in the summer of 1859, a Frenchman who called himself the Great Blondin basically turned this gorge into his own personal theater. And he didn't just walk across, oh no. He pushed a wheelbarrow, he cooked an omelet on a little stove, and he even carried his manager on his back. All while crowds of up to 25,000 people just watched, absolutely stunned.
You know, a spectacle like that is bound to start a rivalry. Another performer, the great Farini, was determined to one-up everything Blondin did. So Blondin cooks a meal? Big deal. Farini decided to carry a washing machine on his back, lower a bucket all the way down to the river, pull it back up, and then actually do his laundry right there in the middle of the wire.
And it wasn't just the guys getting in on the act. In 1876, Maria Spelterina became the first and only woman to cross the gorge on a tightrope. And to add her own flair, she did it blindfolded and sometimes with peach baskets strapped to her feet, just because she could. But after a while, the public's imaginations started to shift. Walking over the gorge just wasn't enough anymore. The new challenge was way more terrifying. Going over the falls themselves. Now, you'd think the first person to ever even attempt such a thing would be some young, thrill-seeking stuntman, right? Nope, not even close. It was a 63-year-old schoolteacher. Her name was Annie Edson Taylor. She was a widow, she was poor, and she saw this incredible, terrifying force of nature as her one and only shot at fame and fortune. So she designed her own vessel, a specially made oak barrel, and on her 63rd birthday, she climbed inside and was pushed over the edge. And incredibly, she survived. They pulled her out 17 minutes later, bruised and battered, but alive. But you know the fame and fortune she was hoping for? It never really came. She ended up dying penniless, leaving behind that one solemn piece of advice for anyone else thinking of trying. Annie might have warned against it, but did people listen? Of course not. Her survival just opened the floodgates for a whole new generation of daredevils, with even crazier and often deadlier contraptions. I mean, just look at the stakes here. A guy named Charles Steffens tied himself to an anvil for weight. Bad idea. The anvil ripped right through the bottom of the barrel, and all they ever found was his arm. Jean Lucier made it in a giant rubber ball. And then there's George Stothicus, who went over in this huge barrel with his pet turtle. He actually survived the plunge but got trapped behind the falls and suffocated. The turtle, which was 105 years old, by the way, it survived. But here's the really weird part. You'd think surviving the plunge was the hard part, right? Well, for the ones who made it, fate often had one last, bizarre twist waiting for them. So take Bobby Leach. He was a circus stuntman and the first man to go over the falls and live. He did it in a steel barrel in 1911 and came out with 2 broken kneecaps and a fractured jaw. It took him 6 months just to heal, but hey, he survived. So this guy survives one of the most violent forces on the planet, only to meet his end years later on a tour in New Zealand when he slipped on an orange peel, the leg got infected, and that's what killed him. You can't make this stuff up. And this kind of strange luck wasn't a one-off thing. Carol Sussex survived his trip over the falls, but died a year later during a promotional stunt that went wrong. And Kirk Jones, who amazingly survived a plunge in 2003 with no protection at all, died trying it again in 2017 inside an inflatable ball. Okay, let's fast forward and bring our story into the modern age, because the rules of this very dangerous game have totally changed. 115 years. Think about that. After the last tightrope walk in 1896, that's how long this gorge stayed empty. For over a century, the High Wire Act was nothing but a memory.
And then, in 2012, Nick Wallenda, who comes from a whole family of famous high-wire walkers, brought the tradition back. He walked a wire from the U.S. side to the Canadian side. But let me tell you, things were very, very different this time. See, this wasn't the Wild West Carnival of the 1800s. His walk was a highly regulated, legally approved, one-time event. They even made him wear a safety harness for the TV broadcast. Nowadays, stunting here is illegal. They only even consider a special permit maybe once every 20 years, which pretty much marked the end of that whole unregulated Daredevil era.
So the era of homemade barrels and illegal tightrope walks might be over, but the falls, as you can see, are still right here, and they still issue a challenge to every single person who comes to see them. So today, the biggest dare isn't about conquering the water. It's about taking a moment to discover the absolutely incredible history and the unbelievable stories of the people who tried right here where you're standing. Thanks for listening.